What's up, everybody? Welcome to Make Things Tiny. My name is Mick. So if you're sitting here right now and you're frustrated because you want to go tiny and you just keep hitting all these different barriers between financing and money and where to put it, just know you are not alone. I've been reading a lot of the comments for this channel. I know y'all are frustrated. So today I wanted to make a video where I talk about alternatives. Again, ways to get creative around going tiny. So today we're talking about manufactured homes. We're talking about if they're tiny homes, so like where that gray area is between a manufactured home and a tiny home. And make sure you watch the end because I'm going to talk about whether or not a manufactured home is a better option for you. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and let's talk about this. Let's talk about manufactured homes within this tiny living space. All right, welcome back. So today we're talking about manufactured homes. We're trying to answer the question about whether or not manufactured homes are actually tiny homes. Like, is there a gray area? Is there some overlap in these definitions? But ultimately, we want to talk about whether or not a manufactured home is a better option for those of you who are looking to go tiny. So bear with me because I know this isn't necessarily what y'all would think we would be talking about today, but I think it's really, really important and I'm going to break down why. So if you remember a little while back, I did a couple of videos where I talked about the tiny house industry in general, and I talked about all those different sectors that impact the tiny house industry. We've got social media, tourism, the real estate market, RVs, manufactured homes is at the top of that. If you remember that image, I'm putting it back up here on the screen for y'all, but manufactured homes. So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about manufactured homes. The reason why I want to talk about manufactured homes is because there's no secret that the tiny house industry itself is kind of experiencing a little bit of a crisis. Now, maybe crisis is a strong word, but between the things that I've read and I've talked about here on the channel, the stuff that y'all are talking about in the comments, there's clearly four main issues within the industry that are worth addressing. So we've talked about rising prices, the prices going up. All of y'all mentioned that. You're all frustrated about it. But then there's the financing piece too. Like, how do you pay for your tiny home? What do you do if you don't have $100 grand sitting around? How do you get a loan? There's the land piece of it. Where are you going to put your tiny house once you've got it? What kind of zoning issues are you going to run into? And then the last piece, which I've talked about a little bit more over the past few weeks on this channel, is the scams part. Even if you do everything right and you've got the money, you've got your loan, you know where you're going to put it, you might end up in a situation where you're out $100 grand because the company was doing something kind of shady, and they filed for bankruptcy, and now you're out $100,000. So we've got a little bit of an industry in crisis, in my opinion, and based on some of the things that y'all have said. So I figured it's worth talking about manufactured homes. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about what a manufactured home is. So for those of you who don't know, a manufactured home is a home that's built in a factory. It's built to the Housing and Urban Development Code standards. It's built on a permanent frame. So it's called a chassis, but it's really just this permanent steel frame that the home is built on. And the language is new, right? So a manufactured home before 1976 was a mobile home, but now we've called them manufactured homes. It has to do with how they're constructed as well too, and different standards and seals on the homes themselves. So, but that's what a manufactured home is, just basic definition. Some of the gray area between a manufactured home and a tiny home actually comes in sort of like the design sizing side of it. So from a size perspective, a manufactured home can be quite small. It can be as low as 500 square feet, maybe a little bit under, like 490 square feet or something like that, but it can go up to over 3,000 square feet. I put 2,000 here because that 500 to 2,000 square foot range is more common, but there are ones that go up to over 3,000 square feet because they can be single, double, and triple. Again, manufactured homes are built in factories, so they're built in like different sections. So you can have a single wide is like the more traditional term we use, like single wide and double wide, but now there's triples as well too. But they tend to be more uniform in terms of design. So when you're looking at manufactured homes on listings, which we'll cover in a little bit, different things like that, they tend to look the same. So that's a distinction between them and tiny homes, because a tiny house can look very differently from one builder to the next, or if you build one yourself. There's quite a few manufactured home dealers in the industry at this point in time in the United States, but there are two big ones. There's Clayton Homes, which is owned by Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett, and then you have Skyline Homes as well too. They've got a 4-bed, 2-bath model, which looks really cool. If you look on their website, you check out the floor plan. But the pricing range is pretty wide for manufactured homes. You can find them for $80K or less if they're used, or I guess they say like pre-owned instead. Or you can have them be like 400 grand for new ones, and even more than that, if you could believe it. We're going to talk about the luxury side of this industry too. In terms of land and financing, you have a couple of options. So manufactured homes tend to sit in manufactured home parks or mobile home parks. For the most part, they're still called mobile home parks. You can put them on land that's zoned for residential, like single family dwellings, but you'll need a permit for that. The cool side about it, or the plus side, if you will, is the financing piece. So you've got FHA loans, Federal Housing Association, Veterans Association loans. You can get financing through a dealer, so they are much easier to finance in comparison to a tiny home. You can get them on Zillow. So you can go on Zillow and you can find a listing for a manufactured home, just like you would a regular standalone home. You can even select for it in the menu where you can like choose what type of house you want to look for. So I found this one here just as an example. This one's in California. It's a $340,000 manufactured home sitting in a community. It's got 4 beds, 2 baths. It's about 1,400 square feet, but they don't mention the space rent. So that's the one thing with manufactured homes. You do have to pay rent on the actual land where you're putting it, if you're putting it in a mobile home park. Obviously, if you buy the land, then you're just paying for the land for the mortgage. But in mobile home communities, for the most part, you're going to be paying space rent, and that ranges. So there is a luxury side to this market, if you can believe it or not. There's like really expensive manufactured homes on the market today. There's been some manufactured home parks where celebrities frequent them. The 2 that stood out to me, I was reading an article about this, and I found one where there's a manufactured home that was on the market for $6.4 million. It was standalone, 2-story, 5 bedrooms, and there's also one going for $3.5 million in Colorado. So there's a very high-end market for these. Mostly because of the views. So you can get something for less square footage. You can put it in an area where, since you can move them in theory, you could put them in an area where maybe you would be paying a lot more. So the $6.4 million manufactured home in California, the houses in that area are going for $9 million. So you are, in theory, saving money by going the manufactured home route. So the question is whether or not they're becoming more popular. From what I understand, I've talked to people in the manufactured housing industry, and I've looked up things on my own as well too. They are becoming more popular. So I found information from Manufactured Housing Village, which is sort of like a data resource website for manufactured homes. And from their site, they talk a lot about the industry is just getting really big and it's growing a lot. So there's over 40,000 manufactured home communities in the United States right now. I did not know that. That was news to me. There's 21 million people currently living in a manufactured home. There's about 80,000 manufactured homes that were created just last year alone in 2023. So I mean, that's huge. Those are some pretty big numbers. Which is great. It shows that the industry is growing and there's a demand for it. There's obviously a need for it with how expensive standalone traditional homes have become over the past 5 years at least. The average space rent is about $683, so that's how much you're paying to put your manufactured home in that park. So I think the closest thing I consider it as just like the lot rent for a tiny house community. So in my mind, that's what it is. So when we're thinking about what I talked about in the beginning, when we're talking about this industry in crisis, we're talking about whether or not all of these factors are playing into your decision to potentially go the route of a manufactured home versus a tiny home. So we've got to sort of compare these industries and these options in terms of rising prices, financing, land and zoning, and then scams. When you do that, it's up to you, right? But it seems like a pretty clear winner in this category. When we're looking at price, tiny homes, I would say win. Now again, I want to know what y'all think on all these different categories and everything I've talking about in this video, but I would say between a manufactured home and a tiny home is definitely a better buy just because you're spending a lot less money. If you can get a manufactured home for, I guess, $100K and you want to fix it up, that's fine, but you're still going to be paying a lot on space rent. And even though it says the average is $683, I honestly haven't found too many places where it's that low. Like in California here, you could pay like almost $2,000 a month for space rent. So it's really going to vary where you live, and it's definitely going to be higher than what you're seeing in most tiny house communities. So I would say the price for a tiny home is definitely better than for a manufactured home. Financing, hands down, it's manufactured home. The fact that you can just get these you can get government loans for it, like much easier. That's a no contest there. For land and zoning, I would say manufactured home too, just because it's been around longer. With those 40,000 manufactured home communities, you're not going to have a problem in terms of where you can put it, and then you can also put it on the land. So it just seems like the zoning laws are more favorable towards manufactured homes, but again, maybe depending on where you live, it might be easier. But I would say, in my opinion, I would go land to zoning. It's definitely going to manufactured homes. With scams, I haven't done any research in this industry, so I don't know if manufactured homes have scams in the same way that we're seeing scams popping up in the tiny home industry, because it is more regulated. You do have HUD involved in the code. You know, you have like the government involved in all those different things. So I think that's going to probably reduce it to an extent. But again, if y'all have heard anything about what's going on with manufactured homes in general, with the parks, that sort of thing, definitely drop it in the comments. So if you're stuck and you're trying to figure out, okay, you know, I can either buy a tiny house and I can, you know, buy land and put it there. I could buy a tiny house, or I can go into a community. I could put it in a friend's backyard, or I could go manufactured home route. These are some of the questions I think every single one of you that are considering going tiny need to ask yourselves. So the main thing is, how much are you willing to spend? First and foremost, your budget is going to dictate what you get. Unfortunately, your budget's going to dictate that. Where you're going to live is another one. If you're location bound, it might make more sense to go a manufactured home. If you have a park nearby and there's no tiny house park nearby, and you don't have the money or the resources to be able to buy land or anyone to put it in their backyard. Resale value, talk about whether or not resale value matters to you, because manufactured homes are going to have a higher resale value than a tiny home, depending on the tiny home's design, the builder, the quality, certifications. All those things are going to affect a resale. For manufactured homes, again, it's more established, it's more regulated, so it's going to be easier potentially to sell it. Design and customization. See, this is a toss-up with this one, because there are some customization aspects of a manufactured home. It's going to be more expensive though. So you're going to either buy one in that lower price range. It's going to be as is. It's just the one that already existed. It's pre-owned, right? It's been used before. You could fix it up just like buying a fixer-upper. For a tiny house, there's maybe more of a degree of customization depending on the builder you're working with. Portability is another one. Tiny homes, in theory, I would say would be potentially easier to move if they're smaller, but you know, depends on the sizing for your manufactured home too, and then sizing into, because your tiny house is gonna sit around, you know, it's gonna be 8.5 feet in terms of width. It's gonna be 10 feet, maybe a little bit bigger if you find a builder that's doing like those 11 and 12 footers I've seen, or like a park model potentially. But in terms of the length, it's probably not gonna get much longer than 40. But for manufactured homes, they've got ones, you know, they're like, you know, 66 feet long, you know, and they're like much wider. So that's just something you have to consider in terms of the size of it, in terms of what you want it to look like. But what do you guys think? If you've been, I know a lot of you have been sort of trying to figure out how you can go tiny. So would you go a manufactured home route instead? Now on paper, they're obviously two very different things. They're industries with overlap. In technically, if you get a manufactured home that's like 450 square feet, you are sitting in that tiny living realm still. Like, is it worth it to y'all to go the manufactured housing route? It's still a downsize for some of you, depending on your square footage of your current homes. What do you think? Have you considered it? So I'd love to hear from you guys. I appreciate you guys taking the time to just sort of listen to this, you know, just kind of like, I mean, in some ways just thinking out loud, trying to figure out, you know, what types of options are available for those of you who are interested in going tiny. This is something I'm thinking about too, like what makes the most sense. But yeah, thanks you guys so much for watching. Again, drop the comments. I want to hear from y'all. And don't forget to think tiny. I'll see you guys in the next one.